Dawn hadn't broken yet when the Haven Brook Hotel shuddered awake under a piercing alarm. The hallway lights flickered against smoke that crawled along the ceiling like a living shadow. On the lobby floor, Callum Brennan, broad-shouldered, jaw unshaven, suit wrinkled from a sleepless night, stopped mid-stride. Above him, from the 7th floor, came a single, trembling cry. "Is anyone there? Please help me." Guests backed away from the elevators, but Callum was already moving, his injured knee protesting every step as he pushed through the stairwell door. He wasn't a firefighter anymore, not in the eyes of the world, yet his body surged forward like it remembered everything. Halfway up, a security guard yelled after him, "Sir, that floor is fully involved." Callum didn't slow. "Then she's running out of time." By the time he reached room 714, smoke had swallowed the corridor whole. He forced the door open and found a woman collapsed by the jammed window, her voice barely a thread. "This wasn't an accident," she whispered into his shoulder. "Someone meant for me to die. Before sunrise, he would save her life. By morning, she would walk into his job interview, and nothing in Callum Brennan's world would remain the same." Subscribe to Canada's Heartfelt Tales for more gripping stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. The fire was only the beginning. Hours later, when the morning sun finally broke through Chicago's skyline, Callum Brennan stood at the entrance of Atlas Dynamics in a shirt he bought for $10. His bandaged hand tucked into his pocket so the hiring panel wouldn't see how badly it shook. The smoke still clung to him like a shadow he couldn't wash off. Yet he stepped inside because he didn't have the luxury of turning away. His daughter's life depended on what happened in this building. He didn't expect the woman he carried through a burning hallway to walk into his interview. And he definitely didn't expect her eyes to widen as if she were seeing someone she thought she'd never meet again. Vivian Ashford didn't look like someone who had nearly died. She stood tall, her voice steady, her presence commanding the room. But the bruise at her temple and the redness around her eyes told the truth. She had survived something she shouldn't have, something someone wanted her not to survive. She listened while Callum spoke, watched the way his shoulders tensed every time he mentioned Waverly, and studied the way he tried to hide the limp he had learned to live with. And when he finished, she didn't thank him for saving her life. She simply said, "I want to see how you work under pressure." From that moment, everything began to shift. Callum dove into his new role with the same focus he once used in burning buildings. He reviewed safety logs, walked factory floors, and spoke with workers who were shocked a director cared enough to ask what they needed. Rumors spread quickly about the quiet ex-firefighter who moved through hallways like he was searching for something long buried. Within days, he found the first crack, an unsigned maintenance form that contradicted an official report from 2 years earlier. Then another, an alarm-tampering record hidden 3 pages deep in an archived file. And then something he couldn't ignore, the signature of Victor Mercer, the former CFO who had been quietly forced out. The same Victor Mercer connected to the company that owned the warehouse fire that ended Callum's career. The same Victor Mercer tied to the suspicious death of Vivian's brother. The same Victor Mercer whose fingerprints now appeared, metaphorically, on the hotel fire. One evening, after the rest of the building had emptied and Chicago's lights glowed like distant embers through the tall windows, Callum placed a folder on Vivian's desk and watched her expression shift from curiosity to something far darker. "Victor," she murmured. "He's still doing it." Callum nodded. "And he's not going to stop unless someone forces him to." The silence between them was heavy, full of grief, rage, and the fragile hope of justice. But Victor was already 2 steps ahead. The next morning, Callum arrived to find security guarding the elevators, his badge deactivated. Diana from HR looked like she had been crying when she handed him the suspension notice. "I'm sorry, Callum. Someone filed a complaint." "Several, actually." "Let me guess," he said. "Falsified certifications. Inappropriate conduct with the CEO." Her eyes flickered with guilt. "We have to investigate. I know you didn't do this, but the board." "The board listens to Derek," Callum finished. "And Derek listens to Victor." He walked out of the building without looking back, but inside his chest a storm was building. When his phone rang later and Victor's voice slithered through the speaker, the storm sharpened into something unbreakable. "You're a man with a sick daughter and a dying career," Victor said, amused. "You walk away, you disappear quietly, and I let you keep her. That's generosity, Mr. Brennan." Callum gripped the wheel until his knuckles turned white. "Touch my daughter and see how generous I am." Victor chuckled. "You still think you can win? You're nobody. I decide what happens next." But he was wrong. Vivian showed up that evening in the dim parking garage, her heels clicking sharply on the concrete, her face pale but determined. "You're not alone," she said. "Not anymore. Victor's made a mistake coming after you." He looked at her with exhaustion buried deep in his eyes. "He doesn't stop. He destroys people. Then we find the truth and expose him where he can't hide." 9 days. That was all they had before the annual shareholders meeting. 9 days of digging through archived reports, interviewing former employees, working with Detective Delgado, assembling timelines, tracking financial transfers, and building a story of corruption so detailed it could not be ignored. Vivian barely slept. Callum slept even less. Waverly drew pictures of Daddy's new job and taped them to the fridge, unaware of the war being fought in whispered conversations behind her. The morning of the meeting, the ballroom glittered with investors and journalists. Callum stood backstage, straightening the frayed edges of his tie, waiting for Vivian's cue. He could feel Victor's eyes even before he saw him, a predator surveying a battlefield he believed he controlled. But today, the flames were finally turning his way. When Vivian called Callum forward, a ripple of confusion spread through the room. Victor's smirk slowly faded as Callum displayed the first slide, the warehouse fire that ended his career. Then the second, the disabled alarm. Then the third, Victor's signature closing the investigation with no explanation. Victor lunged to his feet. "This is fabrication. Blaze. I'll sue every one of you." But Detective Delgado stepped into the aisle, her badge gleaming. "Sit down, Mr. Mercer." And then Callum played the recording. Victor's voice, unmistakable, cold, inhuman. "Make sure she doesn't leave that room. Not like the Ashford kid. Last time was sloppy." Gasps spread through the ballroom like shockwaves. Cameras flashed. Investors whispered his name like it tasted poisonous. Vivian stepped off the stage and faced him, her voice steady and sharp. "You killed my brother. You tried to kill me. And you nearly destroyed a man who never stopped fighting for others. You don't get to hide anymore." Victor tried to run, but there was nowhere left to go. Officers closed in, handcuffs clicked, and for the first time, fear cracked through his arrogance. As he passed Callum, Victor hissed, "You think this changes anything?" Callum looked him straight in the eyes. "It changes everything." The ballroom erupted as Victor was dragged out, reporters shouting, investors furious, cameras capturing every second. The monster who had burned lives for profit now faced a lifetime inside a steel cell. But the story wasn't finished. Over the next months, Atlas Dynamics rebuilt its safety systems, and Callum became the architect of a workplace that valued people over profit. Vivian visited Waverly often, bringing art supplies, reading bedtime stories, laughing at the child's endless curiosity. Slowly, carefully, a new kind of family formed, not out of obligation but out of shared survival. One cold October night, after a long workday, Callum stood in the doorway watching Waverly asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, Cooper curled beside her. Vivian stood next to him, holding 2 mugs of hot cocoa, her voice soft. "You know," she said, "the night you carried me out of that fire, I thought it was the worst night of my life." He looked at her. "It wasn't. It was the night everything finally began to make sense." They sat together in the quiet, not needing to say more. Outside, the city lights shimmered like distant stars, steady, unwavering, alive. And somewhere in a federal holding cell, Victor Mercer stared at a wall he could never escape, replaying the moment the people he had underestimated finally turned the flames on him. And that was only the beginning of what he would lose. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a quieter rhythm, one Callum had almost forgotten how to trust. The chaos that once shadowed every decision finally loosened its grip, leaving space for something steadier to grow. He noticed it in small moments. Waverley's laughter returning after months of worry, the way colleagues greeted him not with fear or pity but with respect, and the soft calm that filled the room whenever Vivian stepped inside. For the first time in years, he wasn't running from anything. He was moving toward something. One evening, long after the city lights blinked on, he found himself standing at the window of his office, watching snow drift gently over the streets below. Vivian joined him, resting her hand lightly on the rail beside his. "You didn't just stop a man," she said quietly. "You changed the path for everyone he hurt." Callum didn't answer right away. Instead, he let the silence settle, warm and full, and realized the truth he hadn't been able to see before. Survival had shaped him, but it didn't define him. What defined him was the choice to keep standing, even when the world pushed hard in the opposite direction. He glanced at Vivian, at the steady strength in her expression, and felt something lift inside him. Something hopeful, something earned. The past hadn't vanished, but it no longer controlled the ending. Behind them, a single framed drawing from Waverley hung on the wall. 3 figures holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. A simple picture, yet it captured everything that mattered. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Canada's Heartfelt Tales. Your support helps us bring more powerful real-life journeys to life.